guest is Kelvin Emmanuel, the Chief Executive Officer at Dairy Hills. Hello, Kelvin, and thank you for joining me this morning. We will be talking very quickly. I know you're getting out of a meeting just for this. Now, let's talk quickly about saving the Naira. Kelvin, yes, I can see you. Kelvin, can you really explain what has been happening in recent days to the Naira, the free fall that we've seen, never before seen? That, in fact, was it 2 days ago, that the Naira at the official market was lower than the parallel market. It seems one day, one drama in this country concerning the currency. What is happening in recent days?
Well, the reality of the situation is that there is no supply in the market. The CBN does not have enough liquidity to match up with the demand. You have an outstanding, you still have about $4.2 billion in outstanding forwards. You have revaluation losses to CBN. The balance of payment position is a net negative. And it's like a speculator's haven right now. And what is interesting is that in the last several days, the Central Bank of Nigeria on Monday issued a circular on the issue of all-in rates and second checks for primary dealers, which are banks. All-in rate basically tells you about the NAFEM rate at which banks are to offer quotes to their clients. And the second check rate tells you about the difference between the NAFEM rate and the parallel market rate, or near the parallel market rate at which the banks actually offer quotes to their clients, which means that the banks offer quotes at a difference between the official market rate or the NAFEM rate and what they call the second check rate. People in treasury and banks can, confirm or attest to this. Central bank basically says that it will no longer tolerate that. So if the banks basically, as primary dealers, get liquidity at the official market rate, not allowed to offer second check rates to their clients. As a follow-up to that, yesterday, the Central Bank of Nigeria issued another circular that says banks are not allowed to hold net open positions long at all. 0% net open position, 20% net short positions. The banks in Nigeria are also obligated to shore the offshore. Now, when I say net open positions, I'm talking about onshore holdings, liquidity they have onshore, liquidity they have in Nigeria. He also said that for their offshore holdings, for their correspondent banks, that they used to maintain clean lines for everything from swaps to paying of dollar obligations for commercial letters of credit and all the other USD obligations banks have internationally. They're obligated to shore up those deposits and also provide a contingency plan for a credit line with a third-party financial institution in case they run into issues. Now, why this is very important is because there's been a long history in Nigeria of banks actually trading, speculating on the currency. They mop up from the official market and speculate on the currency to make profit in what they call mark-to-market trading. Yeah, and that has impacted on the rates because they join in speculation of the currency with the volumes they have, and that has impacted on the exchange rate. So the central bank basically says that from when they issued that circular yesterday morning to today, the banks have 24 hours to liquidate all their net open positions long that they have on the US.
Emmanuel, let me come in here. Do you think that the banks will do this? Because we've seen different circulars from the Central Bank of Nigeria in recent years to the banks. The banks also seem to be, a culprit in this arbitrage and somehow the speculation we've been seeing in the FX market, because they will try to withhold when the Naira gets lower. They try to sell it off to make huge gains, and you see it somehow even impacting their financials at the end of the day, because you see banks turning out huge profits. Can the central bank, with these circulars, there was also another circular to the IMTOs. I don't know if you also saw that one. If we have that, we can put it on the screen. The IMTOs, the circulars to the IMTOs, that they can now, sell at market prevailing rates, unlike what we saw earlier, that the central bank had given them a minus 2.5% to a plus 2.5% band. What it means is that companies like Western Union, MoneyGram, and all of that. So do you think that that would also boost the supply of dollars? Since these guys have been given the go-ahead to sell at prevailing market rates, will that boost diasporans to bring in their monies through the IMTUs?
I think it's an important step that the central bank did when it comes to, removing the peg and allowing them to quote at the rates at which demand and supply, provides in terms of price discovery. However, I will mention that, in 2022, I think it was in 2022 or late 2021, I can't remember the exact date when the Central Bank of Nigeria had issued a circular to IMTUs
Yes.
obligating,
So early 2022, I remember.
yeah, they
Yes.
cannot they cannot do the arbitrage
Yeah.
trade, which is basically they have to hold correspondent accounts with banks in Nigeria and fund those accounts to match the level of their net open positions for remittance. And they have to credit clients in Nigeria or beneficiaries in USD. That ensured that liquidity for dollars were actually brought into Nigeria by MTOs, and dollars were not held offshore, they were held onshore. But this step is a positive step. But what I think the central bank needs to do beyond just issuing a circular as regards this specific IMTO topic is to actually amend the Foreign Exchange Act, okay, and liberalize the market, democratize the market, open the markets up to the IMTOs and the PSSP companies. The banks in Nigeria that form the bankers committee should not have a stranglehold over the foreign exchange market. The banks in Nigeria should not be primary dealers alone. Open the market up to the secondary players to come into the primary market and deal directly with the Central Bank of Nigeria. That's what I think the central bank needs to do.
Okay, if we take a look at what's been happening to the Naira in recent days, the Senate has summoned CBN Governor Dr. Cardoso to appear before it next Tuesday. What do you think that Cardoso will be saying that will be different to these politicians? Now, let me situate my question. Because we're talking about supply and demand of foreign currency. Of course, Cardoso and the central bank does not print dollars, so we need supply. What do you think about these politicians and their behavior towards dollar? I'm actually thinking if these politicians summon Cardoso, these are the same politicians that what they spend is the dollar amongst themselves. So they are also part of the problem. The National Assembly went on to expend so much money in dollars to buy cars for themselves. So I wonder, who is deceiving who really? I don't know
Well,
if you've seen the reason for that.
I understand your point as regards the fish starts to rot from the head. And everything, like John Maxwell says, everything rises and falls on leadership. I understand your point. And, there are questions about leadership and the example it sets for Nigerians. Because when you see that the capital flight from the Naira to the US dollar, even if I think it's because of the negative return on yield and people are trying to, move to safer havens and higher grounds, it's important for the National Assembly and the other arms of government to set like an example in terms of what to expect when they summon Cardozo next week. I think I don't want to preempt it, but he's going to tell them about the structural changes he's making. Like, you see, I'll tell you, Nancy, Treasury of banks are not going to have a good weekend. This is going to be a very dark weekend for Treasury of banks because if the CBN, and I expect that they will, because if they fail to obey the directives that were issued on the 29th and 31st of January, it's going to lead to serious and severe sanctions and, in extreme cases, suspension of their license from the foreign exchange markets. Now, if the CBN follows through with these new changes, you're going to see, in fact, today we're already seeing that people are offering quotes at 1420. I expect that the market might close below 1400 today and trade around 1300 by the close of business today. You're going to see going into this weekend that marginally there might be some appreciation of the Naira. And if they continue with, bringing in liquidity into Nigeria, and, let's mention all the sources for which they can bring in liquidity into Nigeria. They have autonomous and non-autonomous sources. For non-autonomous sources, which is government sources, you have, government-owned enterprises, yeah. But that again is encumbered because in my estimate, out of the 510,000 barrels of crude oil that NNPC has, about 425,000 barrels of that is encumbered currently. So you have net 85,000 barrels of crude oil on a daily basis from joint venture and PSC, and then you still have like 5 months until NLNG comes to do their financial year end and pay dividends and taxes to the federal
But
government of
Emmanuel, all
Nigeria.
these things are midterm, really.
Yes,
Because yes, we really need supply.
so
Sorry to
there,
butt
there,
in. We
there are
really need
no, there are no
suppliers.
unless the president can negotiate for, some kind of emergency support, the inter-central bank. I remember I was mentioning in 2023 that Nigeria needs inter-central bank lending,
For
except you
example,
can
from the
get,
US Fed.
or you can get Saudi Arabia. IMF comes with very strict conditions. I doubt the president will be willing to succumb to.
But some of those conditions were already undertaken: removal of fuel subsidy, foreign exchange, coming together of your foreign exchange rates and all of that. But I understand what you're saying.
Yes. So because IMF is usually seen as an organization that people go for bailout when you've failed completely.
Just like Ghana has done.
They don't want that. The government, Nigerian government, doesn't want that tax. That's why I'm sure he's hesitating to go to the IMF. But unless there's an emergency liquidity of another $10 billion into the economy, I don't think you're going to see the exchange rate come to levels around 800 or 850 within the next few weeks. So he's going to tell the National Assembly that he's making changes. The fact also that the Central Bank of Nigeria did not hold MPC in the last 6 months, affected, because there was vacuum and nature abhors vacuum. The market was confused as to why the Central Bank of Nigeria, despite the fact that inflation was running away, refused to hold MPC. They are scheduled to hold it on the 26th of February. But like I've said, Nancy, listen, the quorum is 6 members. The total membership of MPC is 12. Currently, they don't have a quorum. They have 5, and they need a quorum. President needs to exercise his constitutional right and appoint 3 members to the board of the central bank for them to hold MPC. So, at the end of February, it's going to be an issue of, do you raise interest aggressively, MPR, to align to that inflation to interest yield curve within 400 basis points of 4%, or do you keep it marginally where it is and then continue to see a migration from Naira assets to dollar-denominated assets? This is the question. There are no silver bullets that will work overnight. There's nothing they can do overnight unless there's an emergency intra-central bank liquidity into Nigeria.
Emmanuel, let's talk about the dollarization of the Nigerian economy. And I'm really saddened that we've come to this situation, because I've been talking about this in the last few years, that still in this country you see that organizations, even some business activities, charge Nigerians in dollars while your national currency is the Naira. How can we control this? How can we effectively tame this? For example, I go back to the politicians again, the speculators and all of that. These same politicians that would invite Cardoso are the same politicians that spray dollars at the parties, are the same politicians that do all sorts with foreign exchange. And at the end of the day, the attention moves to the ordinary Nigerian, for example, and everyone is saying, okay, Nigeria is an import-dependent nation, will be an import-dependent nation. How far can we really take that narrative? Bearing in mind that Nigeria has been an import-dependent nation since the 1960s till now. But what has worsened it in the last few years? I hope you understand my point.
I get your point. The reality of the fact is that, listen, when Jonathan left office, he had about $30 billion in terms of your external reserves. The NNPC was paying about $30 billion monthly,
yeah,
into the central bank, even if CBN manages I saw the circular, the president issued a directive for the collection of oil receipts, the move from NNPC to CBN, even if CBN has always managed NNPC's accounts with external asset managers. So you had anywhere around maybe $36 to $40 billion yearly that was coming in from oil and gas receipts, and that was used to stabilize the market and ensure that your balance of payments were stable. The former president came, the immediate past president came and changed from that to they jacked up how much they said Nigeria was consuming in terms of PMS, from 35 million liters per day to 66 million liters per day, even if I don't believe their numbers. And then they adopted a fiscal strategy paper that was dependent on debt as a means of financing budget deficit. from revenue. So the DSDP that took over the oil and gas receipts that was coming into the CBN to stabilize the FX market, and basically they sold that crude oil, in exchange for getting PMS into Nigeria, the direct sale, direct purchase, and that eroded the amount of FX inflows that were coming into the Central Bank of Nigeria to settle your balance of payments and stabilize the markets. So, for example, I'll tell you, Nancy, there's a principle in central banking that says your external reserves, your net external reserves for 1 year, your net external reserve position should not drop below your balance of payment position, your trade balance for 1 year. Nigeria's trade balance is anywhere around $7 billion. Nigeria's net external reserves is minus, is net negative. So it's dropped below $7 billion, which is the reason why you can see the free fall. So the government pivoted from revenue to debt, piled up debt, and then used ways and means to print money from the balance of private and public sector CRR that they couldn't get. I might estimate around 17 trillion naira that was printed, not backed by assets or reserves, and the naira went on a plunge. And you could see that between 2019 to 2020, when about 15.3 trillion naira was generated through ways and means, mostly from money printing, the exchange rate dropped from 365, it dropped to where around over 800, and then it continued to slide. So first of all, it's a fiscal problem that dragged the monetary authorities into the fix that they are in. And it's also the failure of the monetary authority because Sections 2 of the CBN Act says that central bank, it's their work as the banker of the government to advise the government on its finances. So the central bank also failed in advising the government on how to manage its finances. So that is what has brought us to where we are today. So we have to pivot back to, number one, stopping ways and means completely for now, and then also ensuring that the fiscal authorities can ramp up on revenues with steps like, number one, harmonization of the tax code, number one, collapsing all the revenue collections from is to the federal revenue service. And I'd like to say this, Nancy, the Nigerian Customs Service has no business collecting revenues on behalf of the government. Their work is trade facilitation. Just give that function to FIRS and see the improvement in 1 year. So the fiscal authority has to ramp up on collection of revenues and be less dependent on overdrafts from the Central Bank of Nigeria that has basically led to money printing for most part of about 58% of the total ways and means stock of 30 trillion naira that I estimate they printed, and start on the path we were before 2015.
Okay. Emmanuel, lastly, just in less than 2 minutes, what do you think how can we address this crisis that we are in right now? Because the Naira is on a free fall. And what's your own forecast as to where the Naira would be from now to the next 2 months? Because I've heard different analysts say different things. In fact, a friend who is also an analyst, an economist, told me last year, December, that Nancy, we should be very careful that the Naira may hit 1,000 Naira as at last December, or 1.5, no, about more than 1,000, and he did that. So what do you think should be the solutions, quick solutions now that can get us out of these quagmire? Then secondly, how does the central bank balance the issue of interest rate hike when the MPC comes up later this month? There's anticipation that the central bank would raise interest rates as against increasing money supply. You understand what I mean? Because money supply has also been on the rise. So how do you expect that balancing act?
Well, so there are no silver bullets, and I'm also very reluctant to say where I think the exchange rate is going to be.
Okay, what do you think is the fair value? Let me make it easier for you.
The fair value, I think the fair value is anywhere between 950 and 1,050. I think that's fair value.
Okay.
So I don't see further upsides, even if there's a lot of doom and gloom about the exchange rate. I don't see further upsides from where it is currently. However, the liquidity issue needs to be addressed. The CBN governor and the president, the minister of finance, they need to get on the plane and get emergency support from another central bank. And this is, Nancy, this is the reason I've always said that what is the benefit of being in OPEC if you cannot exercise that to go to your OPEC members that are liquid to get some intra-central bank lending. These are the issues we have to address. Instead of go for the Project Gazelle kind of deal NNPC did of pledging
That was
164
actually
million
confusing, because
barrels
a
of
lot of
crude.
people thought that it was like a bailout, and then NPC came out to say it was for royalties and taxes and.
Exactly. So there needs to be liquidity. However, Cardozo is walking a very tightrope. I don't envy him. I think he has a very difficult job, one of the most difficult jobs in government. And I honestly believe that as much as Nigerians are angry, Nigerians are very angry. I feel their pain because it affects me too. You know, Cardozo needs to be given a little more time. That's what I
Okay.
think.
How much is more time?
Give him another 6 months.
Another 6 months. Okay. He
Yes.
was appointed in September, so another 6 months. All right. All right, Emmanuel, I think I'll leave you now so that you go back to your meeting. Thank you very much for joining me.